About 5-6 years ago, before the Tangible Kingdom story was really out there, it seemed like most of the discussion we were having with pastors or just normal folks in the church was, why do we even have to consider doing church differently? Why the tangible kingdom? And the answer is quite simple. That is that it ain't Kansas anymore. The world's changing quite a bit. This illustration that we often do to kind of show this, about 80, 90 years ago, this was the percentage of the population in America that was actually in a church on Sunday. And church played a key role in the culture. It was actually really very central to the culture. And it worked because the values inside the church actually mirrored the values of the culture. So whether or not you were in the church or not, most people had kind of good old-fashioned family values. They had a sense of wanting to be loyal at their job, work hard. There was a sanctity of marriage that most people expressed. We were kind of pro-America, all that type of stuff. And so really all you had to do to be a good church was just do church well. And so we would preach sermons and have great programs, and we did what we would call, attractional church. And the idea was just simply, if we do church well, the culture is going to be attracted to us and they'll come to us. And it actually worked. I came to faith in that environment. I know many of you did as well. The key assumption, though, of that type of an attractional setting is that it's going to work when people are in the building. Okay? And so as long as you're in the buildings, good stuff will happen. Well, about 1980, this was now the percentage of people that were in a church. Something was happening here. It started really in the 1960s, mid-1960s. All of a sudden, those basic values that the church used to share with the culture were beginning to be separate. There was now a chasm between the values of the church and the values of those outside. And so there was really a rebellion against the government. There was a rebellion against family or parents having authority over us. There was definitely now beginning to be a rebellion against the church and their perceived authority over us. So all of a sudden there's kind of a dissonance between the church and the culture. And the church actually became, if we had any sort of interplay with the culture, it was really more that we were fighting against the culture. And so we just began to move apart. Well, what's interesting is that's continued. And right now, conservatively, with the amount of people that are leaving the church every year in America, at about the year 2020, we now think this will be the percentage of people in America that are actually going to be in a church on Sunday. Okay, pretty stark difference. So within 100 years, where that used to be mostly people in the church, this now is going to be what we call a pure missionary context.
Sometimes we need to shatter the old, even if it's all we've ever known. For years, many churches have adopted the attractional model, where if you build it, they will come. We sang that it only takes a spark to get a fire going, and our fire was the church. So we break the bank to prop up our buildings and programs. But the lost still aren't coming. So now we must live among them, in our neighborhoods, our schools, our workplaces, everywhere. It'll require much more of us, more than friendly smiles for an hour on Sunday. And is about being a missional church, releasing incarnational people into the world. Yet it's also about coming together, to refresh, to regroup, to renew our collective calling to change the world. As Jesus encouraged us to imagine like a child, we need to reclaim the courage to be scattered. It's time to explode the status quo, to break free from religion, to discover the adventure of missionary life, to learn how to fly, and together build a gathered and scattered church.
I believe that we have done church the same way for so long that the idea of a new and yet simultaneously ancient form of doing church is almost inconceivable. The idea of living in natural rhythms of life in community. The idea that the Sunday gathering is not the end-all, be-all, the big show. We got to get everybody in. The idea of being sent rather than saying, come to us. I think some of those things are almost inconceivable because church, to some degree, has become industry. It's become an easy desk job for intelligent men who don't want to work with their hands, but who may not necessarily have a vision for changing the world with this powerful message of the gospel. And I think that unless we reconceptualize from the scriptures what the church was intended to be, a body of people, a body of believers moving toward the reign of God while proclaiming the goodness and glory and grace of God to those who are not embracing the reign of God, then I think we're going to continue to drift into irrelevance. As long as Christianity is politicized, as long as people are marginalized, as long as church is a place that you go to rather than an identity of who you are, I think the future of the church in America is bleak. I think it will fade into irrelevance. And I think that we will be trapped into doing more and more to get people into our doors and doing less and less to proclaim the good news of the gospel, to actually see people transformed and changed.